This is me giving a talk on sustainable economic growth to a theater full of environmentalists. And I'm going to share with you the entirety of that talk in this video. But before I show you the video, I wanted to give you some context behind it. This all started a few months ago when a few of the professors in the sciences and environmental sciences at my university decided they wanted to put together a conference for students to help them understand the challenges facing their future. They were going to get a theater that had a capacity of 400, plus they were going to broadcast this online. They wanted to have this big discussion on what are these environmental challenges that we face. But they had a problem. They wanted to also talk about the economic side. Like, clearly, one of the big drivers of the challenges that they saw was economics and business and growing the economy. And so they needed somebody to represent that side and make a case for economic development. So they came over to the business school and they went and talked to the dean's office and said, hey, we'd like a professor who could come and speak to this giant room full of environmental students and explain the case for economic growth and development. I teach development economics and I teach a course on American economic history. So the dean's office came to me and said, Craig, what do you think about presenting in this conference? And even though I teach those classes, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable going out and presenting this case, but I did see the need to have someone out there presenting it. So I decided to really read up on these topics. And that's some of the context I want to provide here, because in the talk you're going to see, I do make a lot of arguments that you don't see cited until the end of the talk. And so I just want to one, tell you that I was reading books like The Wizard and the Prophet, More from Less, and Not the End of the World. In fact, if you watch this channel regularly, I just did a review on this book. And as I started going deeper into these books and trying to understand the challenges we face and the role that economics plays in addressing those challenges, I started to feel a heavier and heavier responsibility to make sure that I got this right. Because those professors organizing this conference, or at least one of them, was going to be the other keynote. And his talk was going to be on how economic growth must end soon, otherwise the planet will be destroyed. And he was going to present a plan on how we could transition from an economy focused on growth towards an economy where we have a new steady state and at a much lower level of GDP. And I found that I just strongly disagreed with that perspective, and I felt a huge responsibility to make sure that these students heard a fair presentation of the other side. And so I put a lot into this talk and thought, you know what? I think my audience would be interested in hearing what I had to say on this. If you're interested in hearing what my counterpart said, he gave a very nice keynote. He's been doing this for years, talking about these issues. And so it's a fantastic presentation. If you want to see, I'll put a link to the entire conference in the description below. But I hope that this is something that's informative for you and something where, if it doesn't answer all of your questions, it at least sparks some questions, gives some answers, sparks some questions, and makes you really consider what the role of economic growth is in creating our future. And hopefully, what I did in front of all of these environmentalists was make a strong enough case for economics. Now, this is the first time I've done something like this, but if you're interested in talking more about these kind of topics, like degrowth, like my counterpart was giving his talk on, or, if people are interested in me giving these talks in other locations, just go ahead and reach out to me. You can get my newsletter in the description below as well. And in that newsletter, I may be talking a little bit more about these kind of points, and it's a great way to contact me if you're interested in this. And that's all I have to say for given the context. So let's go ahead and show you the talk.
It's the summer between my freshman and sophomore year. I'm sitting down to watch a movie, and I don't realize yet that I'm about to have a canon event. I am thinking about what I want to major in, maybe like some of you here in this audience. I fell in love with economics when I was in high school. It was so interesting to me. Things made sense. And then as I considered what my future would be, I wasn't quite sure what I could do with economics. Now, I was stupid back then and didn't realize that there were just so many opportunities for people who study economics. But this is my main fear as I'm trying to decide about my future. And I had decided instead to major in computer science. I had a knack and a history for programming, and I decided, why not use that? And I could get some great career skills out of my college education. But I'm in this movie, and that thought is still tormenting me. What do I want to major in? Am I sure that this is the path that I'm gonna take? And during the course of this movie, I have a realization. I don't really want to major in computer science. I really do want to major in economics. And it's from this movie that I decide to go on and study economics in college, and today I'm here as an economics professor at Utah State and the Hudson School of Business. And you say, what kind of movie might have such power? Why is it that I'm sharing this story with you right now? Well, there's two reasons that I'm sharing this story with you right now. One is hopefully for some of you today, this conference over the next couple of weeks will be a canon event. Maybe there's something that you learn about yourself, about the world, something that causes you to say, it's that conference back then at Utah State that made me realize something new about my desires, about the world, whatever it is that you're looking for today. But the other reason why I thought about this is because the movie that I saw was WALL-E. And it is WALL-E that is responsible for me being here today. And it's an interesting thing to think about because the point of WALL-E is this unsustainable growth that has denuded the planet and forced humankind to flee to space in hopes that the little robot that could can help us return back to Earth one day when it's received its vitality again. And that is something that we might be worried about. No, it's not the clicker, that is. We have already heard today about the dangers facing Utah itself. As we've had large economic growth, we're starting to see environmental consequences, the Great Salt Lake being one of the most visible ones. We've seen this in the West. Arizona, since 1957, the population has grown 555%. Sounds like a Little Caesars deal, 555. Come and grow with us here in Arizona. Well, is the West even meant to sustain a population like this? Is it even possible for us to continue to grow the economy without damaging the very place that we call home? It's like there's a flashing yellow light warning us that we're headed for something in danger, and we need to slam on the brakes and make sure that we don't go out of control. This might have you ask the question, what does it mean to have sustainable development? Maybe that term has been thrown around. You might hear it in your classes, in the media. But what does sustainable development mean? This has been a question that's been on our minds for quite some time now. Back in 1983, the UN brought together the Brundtland Commission, also known as the World Commission on Environment and Development. In 1987, they published a report and they defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of future generation, the ability of future generations to satisfy their needs. Are we able to reach sustainable development? Have we ever had sustainable development? Well, often you hear about back in the past, we had sustainable development, and since the recent developments, we have seen unsustainable development. But let's go back and look at that past. This is infant mortality rates from 1800 to 2021. We are living in this era up here, but as we go back, you see infant mortality rates as high as 30%. Suppose there was a love story between two characters randomly named Travis and Taylor, who you are highly supportive of. It's a love story, but that baby's not saying anything. Because 1/3 of children die because of exposure to disease, undernutrition. So many issues in this world. And this is just for the data that we have consistently available. We go back to ancient societies, looking at ancient Egypt and the likes. We're calculating mortality rates for children before puberty as high as 50 to 70%. A world where you don't get to see your child grow and mature. This is the annual hours worked per worker. We hear all the time about, we have to work so much. We're over here, where within a year, we're working 1,500 to 2,000 hours a year. In the past, to support yourself, you had to work more than 3,000 hours a year, 50% more than the average person is working today. That's what it took to survive, to live in a world where 1/3 of your children die. Today, we get less hours worked, and we get to use that extra time to explore so many things. For example, we get to be educated. This is global literacy from 1820, global exposure to education, some form of basic education. Back in those times when we had high infant mortality rates and long working hours, very few people went to school. Over time, we've been able to get more and more people into school. Education gives us skills, that gives us opportunities, and lets us live more fulfilling lives. It's hard to capture other changes in graphs. But imagine going back to 1820 just if you were a woman. Imagine going back to 1820 if you were Black. Imagine going back to 1820 if you were any other sort of marginalized community. The amazing opportunities that have been opened up in the last only 200 years, thanks to economic growth and development, have met so many needs. And that's something that I really want to make sure you walk out of this conference understanding. The world has never had sustainable development, because sustainable development has two halves. You have to meet the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. We have never been able to meet the needs of the current generation. If you are fine with living in a world where 1/3 of your kids die, are your needs being met? Absolutely not. It is amazing that economic growth has brought us to a point where we can meet your needs. But again, there's a yellow light flashing. We are just starting to meet the needs of the current generation. It's easy for us to look at this as we live in the United States and say that needs are being met, even though there are communities where they are not. Now go down to Haiti, where just last year, 4,000 people were murdered in the capital of Port-au-Prince because there's no government and gangs have taken over that country. Their needs are not being met right now. So we still have work to do to meet the needs of the current generation. But there is that yellow flashing light. Are we meeting the needs of the future generation? Are we compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs? That is a serious question, and is something that we should consider. And there are people that will want to deny that there are any problems going forward. And that is not what this is about. There certainly are things that we need to be worried about going forward. The question is, where should we be placing those concerns? This is the theme or the thesis of this conference. You can tell that we must be in some sort of canon event because my text is glitching. But it says, modern life is literally built on resources such as oil, natural gas, wood products, minerals, and such. and continues to rely on them for its upward economic trajectory. But these resources have finite limits. These are things that we have stated in the thesis as if they are fact. And now the question is, should we accept the premises of this conference? Well, it's natural to believe that that's the premise, because here we have a relationship between real GDP in the United States and energy consumption, and they move in lockstep. These have been indexed so that way you can see the percentage increase, where 1970, we're indexing off of that year, both directions. You don't get more GDP without more energy. It's like the economy is a machine being fueled by energy that spits out economic growth. Now, when I think about this graph, I think about another time back when I was your age. Again, it's freshman year, and I'm talking to a girl. I probably don't realize at the time that I'm trying to impress her, but the fact that this story still lives in my head rent-free tells me that I was. So, in elementary school, had a best friend who was Japanese. And he would get the Nintendo video games before they were released in the United States. And I remember playing Donkey Kong with him, and he's reading the Japanese to me. And I just think, this is so cool. And of course, this is the 90s. You're growing up, being exposed to One Piece, Dragon Ball, and Pokemon, right? Japan is becoming culturally dominant, and its technology is flooding the US. So when I go and register for my first semester of classes, I look at the course curriculum and I'm like, whoa, I could sign up for a Japanese class. There's no one stopping me from doing that. And so I start taking Japanese. I'm talking to this girl who's studying Chinese. And she looks at me when I've told her what I'm doing, and she's like, why would you study Japanese? And of course, I've already revealed that I was very concerned about my future when I'm choosing the things that I study. And so, of course, I tell her, well, with all the technological advancements, Japan is truly where the future of the economy is going. And she says, no, the future of the global economy is clearly China. If you are interested in learning a language that's going to be helpful as you go out into the business world, you should be studying Chinese. And I, had to hunker down and defend myself and very solidly said, no, it's Japan that we should be betting on. And, many years later, it's very easy for me to say that she was right and I was wrong. Most important indicator being, I have actually been to China and I have never been to Japan. But I was basing my projections on the future on my history growing up in the 90s. On what my experience was, without looking at what things had been, even after the 90s, which I should have seen. And so if you base your view on what it takes to grow the economy based on these old data, you're gonna miss this beautiful picture that emerges. We have seen a decoupling between economic growth and energy consumption. Our economy continues to grow without needing to consume more energy, without needing to consume more resources. Have we perfected this yet? No, but we are working on it. And we've seen that it does not take more and more resources. It does not take more oil and wood and all of these things to fuel the economy, as we assume in the thesis of this conference. So what happened? Some say, it's just that we're exporting this to other countries. No, actually, we can look at economic growth and we can look at our emissions coming out of here, and we can adjust our emissions based on our consumption. Are we having other countries produce our stuff, they consume the energy, and so it looks like we've reduced our energy consumption, when in reality we haven't. No, we have reduced our energy consumption. In fact, in most of the developed countries, we continue to grow the economy while shrinking our consumption-adjusted energy use. And in fact, it's the poor countries that are growing without reducing their resource intensity. We want to escape that. We want to help them get out of that. That's going to require economic growth. So how has this happened? How can we keep the economy growing when without putting stuff in? It seems like you need to feed this machine. How is it still pumping things out? There's a couple of really important developments that have happened here. One I like to look at because it maps this so well is the relationship between crop yields and land harvest and land planted. So this is corn, how much corn acreage there is, and how much corn yield there is. And it doesn't really matter which one is which because they move the same, just like that other graph. If you want more corn, you need to plant more land in corn. And that's historically how it had to be. We've started with slash and burn agriculture, where we go down, we cut down a bunch of trees, we burn them, and we let the ash of the trees become the organic material that enriches that soil. But we exhaust that soil over time, and so then we move to a new area. We slash down more trees, we burn them, we grow. We found out that there's fertilizer from cows or other livestock, right? Let the livestock graze, use the manure as fertilizer. This is fantastic. But it still doesn't, so that gives us more for that. But now if we want even more, we still have to move on to more land and put more fertilizer on it. Fertilizer becomes such a valuable resource for producing food that we start turning towards guano. We start looking at these islands covered in bird feces and saying, let's mine those. And we just hire professional pooper scoopers to go out there, take it from these islands, and we literally go to war with other countries to try and get control of these resources. Those are transported around the world. Railroads bring them out. They allows us to expand west, but still, if we want more corn, we need more and more land. Same with the now synthetic fertilizer that we get from the Haber-Bosch process. Right? Nitrogen is in the air that we breathe, but it's hard to extract because it's inert. The Haber-Bosch process comes through, extracts the nitrogen, turns it into ammonia, and allows us to use it for fertilizer. We get more out of that land. But again, there becomes a limit where we say, if we want more, we need more land. Then comes Norman Borlaug, not just an American hero, a world hero. It's so sad to me that his story is undertold. Norman Borlaug is working for an organization that's trying to reduce rust, which is a fungus that comes into America and eats up all of the wheat plants. It starts in Mexico. And they have this idea, hey, if we can help Mexico fight this rust, then it won't blow up into our fields. And then we benefit, they benefit. This is a great thing. We should attack it at the source. Norman Borlaug goes down with the organization and he sees poverty in Mexico. And he has the same argument that I have here. These people, even if we help this out, it's going to be very little. They need a massively improved economy if we're going to meet their needs. So he has this idea. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and figure out how to produce more wheat for the given land that we have. And wheat has this nice evolutionary advantage. It's an evolutionary disadvantage because as wheat gets taller, you block out the other wheat. And so it's like evolutionary pressure competes to push it to be taller and taller. The problem is if you get taller and if you get more wheat on the stalk, it becomes top heavy, it falls down, and it dies. And you actually can't produce the agriculture there. Norman Borlaug finds dwarf stalk wheat, hybridizes it with highly productive wheat, and is able to create the green revolution. His story is so amazing. He bought his own farm, and he didn't have enough money for the capital. It came with a plow, but he didn't have livestock. So he strapped the plow to his own back and had his neighbor guide it as he just walked up and down the field. This man's a hero. His dedication, and he has been able to change the world and feed the world. And it's because of those innovations that we've now decoupled agricultural production from land use. Our agriculture is so productive now that we're actually using less land than we were 100 years ago to produce 20 times as much food. Sorry, on that one, it's about 10 times as much food. That's amazing. Innovation and getting better and better at using our resources is a key tool for moving forward. That is how we've been able to decouple economic growth from energy consumption. We have been able to become more efficient. But that's not the only thing. How else are we increasing economic growth without consuming more and more resources? Well, let me tell you about when I moved out to Connecticut for graduate school. This is the house that we lived in. And we way underestimated how poor we were gonna be in graduate school. Graduate school, is a PhD program. They tend to give you stipends. This stipend was designed for a single student. I had a wife, a kid, and by the end of our first year, we had a second kid. By the time I graduated, we had 4 kids. This stipend was not meant to support all of us. I like to describe how poor we were as bland oatmeal poor. We couldn't afford milk. We couldn't afford any sugary seasonings or sugary cereal. We had oatmeal, we boiled it, and that's what we ate for breakfast. We were bland oatmeal poor. So poor were we that during the cold winters when I couldn't take my son right here out to the park, I would go to Walmart and just walk around the aisles, not to buy anything, just to get him out of the house and find the little sample toys that you could play with and let him just ride up and down the aisles, okay? We were poor. And as we were hoping to get more money, clearly that was gonna go towards buying more food, satisfying our needs. But thankfully, the great university here, Utah State University, has given me a great salary to support my family, though it could be higher. And with that salary, yes, we bought more food, but that is not how we spent all of our money. Now, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is me attempting to break someone's arm. I love this picture, and I really just put it up to flex, but that's all right. I spend my money not just on buying more and more food or more things that require resources. I have a jiu-jitsu coach. I spend a significant share of my money on things like that. My wife hires things like a personal trainer every once in a while, right? These are hiring people and services that don't require using much more resources. My jiu-jitsu instructor is eating every day, and he's satisfied, but it doesn't require me burning coal to fuel him, though sometimes he's a machine and it feels like it. We buy more and more services. As you buy more accountants, more lawyers, as you buy personal trainers, and being here in this university, buying more education, you are purchasing more and more things that don't require more and more resources. You're getting more economic value. You're contributing to economic growth without having to contribute to depleting finite resources. That is the key to decoupling economic growth from energy consumption. We buy things that don't require more and more intense use of resources. That's how it's happened. How do we make sure it keeps happening? Well, there's a couple of things that we need to focus on given on what I just talked about. We need more innovation. Innovation has been a key driver to make sure that we use fewer resources and get more value out of them. There is still so much more that we need to do to innovate. We've had a green revolution in India, a green revolution in the West. We need a green revolution in Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa underproduces relative to the rest of the world. And that is because we have not focused on designing seeds that are adapted to the specific climate of the sub-Saharan African region. We need more work going on that. We need more work, more innovation in reducing disease environments. So that way we can meet people's needs. Again, malaria is a huge issue in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's only just recently that we've finally been able to crack a code at possible vaccinations against malaria. That was driven by the innovation that we saw in response to COVID-19. These innovations are what we need to go forward to get more of satisfying the current generation's needs without compromising future generations' abilities to meet their own needs. What else do we need? Capitalism. And you should have seen this one coming. We're economists. Of course we're gonna talk about markets whenever we get the chance. Capitalism has been a major fuel for bringing these innovations to reality. That's one of the reasons why we don't see as much of an innovation driven towards places like sub-Saharan Africa, because the return on the investments in those areas is very low right now. People would rather focus on innovations here in the United States. And so we need to make sure that we're designing the systems that allow for people to go out and make these innovations in the place where they're most needed. And that's why most innovations are towards reducing resource intensity, because resources cost money. Scarce resources cost more money. Innovations that require us to use less of a scarce resource and can help us shift to a more abundant resource are going to be snatched up by businesses that say, hey, I want to reduce my costs so I can have higher profits. That provides the incentive. People respond to the incentives of prices are going up, my profits are going down. How do I get out of this situation? A lot of the world is mispriced. Like, the nice thing about capitalism is we say, let's put this out here and let the individuals find out how they want to allocate their resources. That's the distinguishing aspect of capitalism, is that resources are owned and allocated by non-governmental organizations. We run into trouble when we have the government organizing all of economic activity. We see this in communist China back in the 1950s and 60s. Mao had this great idea. Let's come up with the 4 pest campaign. Sparrows are eating our grain. If we didn't have sparrows eating our grain, we would have higher agricultural yields. Seems like a good idea at first, until you kill every sparrow in the country. Because yes, sparrows eat grain, but they also eat pests. And when you don't have the competitor to take them away, those pests come and decimate agriculture, and that contributes to many botched policies that lead to the Great Famine in China, that leads to millions and millions of people dying, their needs not being met. We're seeing this today in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka last year 2 years ago, said, we are gonna switch to organic farming. So they banned fertilizer imports. Food scarcity went up, prices went up. It was a terrible situation, terrible policy when we just say we should have the government organize all of that economic activity. But I am no capitalism maximalist. I also believe that we need policy. We need sound policy from the government that not only promotes those things that will help us grow, but gets out of the way when there are things that we still need. We just talked about housing and the scarcity of housing here in Cache County. In Providence, just recently, there was a proposal, there was an approved development for denser housing. But you know what? The locals said, we don't want denser housing around here. And they voted to change the zoning. That is not, when we have house prices going at $500,000, there are plenty of people who would love to come in and develop this. But we have policy that's getting in the way from us being able to do this. We saw about the Great Salt Lake and the challenges we have with water here in Utah. It turns out that of the major US cities, Salt Lake has among the lowest per gallon water rates. It also consumes more water. Shocking. Our water is cheaper and we consume more. Our rates are 96 gallons per person per day, compared with 78 in Tucson, 77 in Los Angeles. I told you about my Little Caesars deal in Arizona earlier, 555, 555% population growth in Arizona since 1957. They have reduced their water use, total water use, by 3% at that same time. They use less water with over quintuple the population because prices tell people, I shouldn't be using all of this water. I'm going to cut back on my water use. We need policies that put proper prices on these scarce resources. From this conference, I hope you're able to go out and look at more of these things. Here are some books that I recommend that would be very interesting to continue your understanding of how we're able to continue economic growth and development and reduce resource intensity. But that yellow light that's warning us here, that's telling us we need to slow down, that is not a yellow light telling us to slow down. That's a yellow light telling us that something is coming and you need to step on the gas and speed up to get through that intersection. Because if you don't, yes, we're gonna run into problems. But we need economic growth to make sure we can satisfy everybody's needs today and satisfy the needs of the future. I am not denying that we have issues that we need to resolve. There are plenty of people that want to be out there and deny these. But if you deny that there are solutions, you are on the same side as the people who deny that there are problems in the first place. And so I hope you come out of here today confident and excited to be part of those solutions, because you're who's going to come through and make those. Thank you.